It's time to get sexy with Dr. Darrel Ray on Secular Sexuality.
Welcome to Secular Sexuality today. Today we're going to be talking with Tim, who's going to be giving us his experience and knowledge about reparative therapy, a boondoggle of a approach to helping people with their sexuality. So thanks, Tim, for joining us. And I'm glad you reached out to me. So let's begin with asking the question: why'd you reach out to me? What was your motivation?
Well, I was actually writing a book, and I kept coming across your information. So I kept seeing it, and then I got further into it. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. So some of what you said, I even think I've quoted you once or twice in the book. So I just wanted to reach out to you. And then I saw that you're doing this podcast, and it kind of went along with my background and thought it would be a good connection.
Great. Well, it's always good to hear. Kind of glad to hear people are seeing what I've got to say occasionally. But I'm most interested in what you've got to say. You've evidently you've written a book. Tell us right up front, what's the name of your book and how can people get a hold of it?
So this is my third book, and it's called Rethinking Everything When Faith and Reality Don't Make Sense.
Okay.
The book is for people who have experienced evangelicalism or grown up in fundamentalist backgrounds that are in this place in their lives where they've kind of taken it all in, but now they're in an environment where they're thinking things haven't quite panned out, or they're looking at a Donald Trump and the leaders of the movement that they trusted, and it's just not fitting with what they believe to be true about the Bible and their beliefs. So it just kind of goes onto that extra
interesting.
journey.
Okay. That sounds like a very interesting aspect. So you interviewed these four people, or did they just write it themselves?
No, this is based on my experience. So my second book was called Going Gay, and that's where I told my story of coming out of the church, having spent 7 years in a ministry. It was actually the number one ministry in the world at the time, in the early 90s, called Love in Action. And so I spent all this time, and it was at a point in history where the religious right and the LGBT community were kind of at odds in the early 90s. Following AIDS, and then our ministry just started getting all this press. So we were appearing in all these television shows and radio shows and doing all this. So I was in it for so long when, after I came out many years later and I had Going Gay come out, then people were contacting me and saying, hey, that's my story too. Or the wives were saying, you know what, I was in that situation. This is what happened to my husband. And then I got blamed. So it was those kind of stories where I started hearing they had a very similar experience. They grew up with it, they believed it, but it didn't turn out like they thought it would.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty radical. I'm amazed. That's pretty cool. 7 years you were in this ministry. What was the church, or what was the denomination?
It was a non-denominational fundamentalist church. I grew up in the Assemblies of God, Pentecostal Church of God. And when I realized that I had this issue in my life, I contacted them. Again, this is, late 80s. I had heard about them on a television show. I had contacted them. I didn't realize how close they were to my house. And that's how I got involved with them. And so the theology that I had as a young minister was the same theology they had. And it was just it seemed like a connection made in heaven, that this is where I was supposed to be.
Okay, a dumb question here. Why were you contacting them? What did you think they had to offer you?
Well, so I contacted them because I didn't know that I was gay when I was younger. I didn't have a word for it. I grew up, I was 14 in 1979. And I think that's about the time I realized that I was gay. Uh-huh. And the American Psychiatric Association had declassified homosexuality as a mental illness in 1973. So that was just 6 years earlier.
Right.
Growing up in a family where we weren't intellectuals, we had no reason to know any of this information or what it was. We never talked about it. I just kind of thought this was something that had happened. I thought maybe I would grow out of it. And when I realized that it wasn't changing, I wasn't going to grow out of it, I started begging God to just take this thing away. So, and I tried for almost 10 years to pray it away, and it wasn't working. And so I contacted this ministry who seemed to have the answer. They were saying that they could, help people change, and that it was a matter of committing your life to Christ. And I thought, well, maybe it's different than what I've been doing.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved.
So they had a special sauce for committing yourself to Christ. Is that what you're saying? Or you
That's
thought
what
they
it
did?
sounded like.
It
Yes.
sounded like. All right. Well, let's talk about the special sauce that they had. Or the vaccine, or whatever you want to call it. What happened after you contacted them, and how did you?
So what happened after I contacted them was I went and I met the founders of the ministry, and this was Frank Worthen, his wife Anita. I can say their names because they're everywhere. They're all over the internet as well. And great couple, very nice couple. Again, our theology matched, so it felt like the right fit to me. They said the right things. We believed the same things. They came out of the Jesus movement, as did my family, in the Assemblies of God. So it seemed like we were on the same page. When I met them that night, I drove out there because it was in San Rafael and I lived in Sacramento. So I drove out there and I went to the Bible study, which is kind of, it was freaky because I'd never been around anybody like that before. And I kept saying, look, I'm not really gay because I'm a Christian and I know those two things don't go together. So I just have this issue that I need to deal with. And they talked about how it was a bad relationship with my father and, all the things that are all so Freudian from 100 years ago. But at the point, again, I wasn't educated. I didn't know. So I just thought, oh, okay, well, this makes sense to me. My dad and I didn't always get along and I'm the shy, quiet introvert. So I thought, well, maybe this adds up. Maybe that's exactly what happens. So if I go and I pray a different way, I pray that God will heal that relationship. Maybe that's that special sauce. Maybe that's the thing that's going to make the difference.
Okay, so you got involved with them, and they opened their arms. They were very welcoming to you.
They did, yes. And I had a special connection with Anita. She was Frank's wife, so he is quote unquote ex-gay, or was ex-gay. He died last year. And Anita, quick wit, very funny. We got along really well. And she was very caring and loving and kind. And so I just kind of clicked with her in the ministry and ended up staying. So what happens during that period of time, however, is that you get guys who come into this organization who have never talked to anybody. They are Christians. They're struggling with their faith because they're trying to reconcile their sexuality with their faith. They finally get to this place and they meet other people like them. So when you're there, there's just this huge relief of, oh my gosh, I found this place to belong. I found people who are like me, who understand what that experience is like. So you get the feeling is that, yes, there is hope, there is healing, things are going to change. There's a lot of excitement around it. A lot of tears, a lot of relief because you're just in this place where you feel so comfortable.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what happens as well is that you go through this period where you're now in Bible studies and we're talking about these feelings and we're saying that this is because of XYZ happened to you. And so you start to think, well, this is it. And for me, anyway, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, those sexual feelings they kind of went away. I didn't know about suppression at the time, but that's pretty much what was happening is there's no place to act out. There's no pornography. You're not alone. So there's really no place to act out at all. Uh-huh. And so for me, I thought, well, this is healing. This thing is finally going away. I'm finally going to get my life the way that I believe God said it would be. And so by the time I finished this 1-year live-in program with all these guys, I felt like I had changed. I felt like things were different.
You were living there for a year?
Yes.
Wow. And there were how many other people there?
All right. So this sounds like the beginning of a porno, but it's not. What happened was, is that you...
Hey, I'm all for porn, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. So they bring guys in. There were 2 different houses, and you live with about 12 guys in each house. So these are, young, attractive gay men who get together and say, we don't want to be gay anymore.
Yeah. Right.
So in our house, it was we had 2 to 3 to a room, and you're living with these guys. So you're eating with them, you're spending your time with them. We go to church together, we go to Bible studies together. We have these meetings during the week where we're talking about our feelings and talking about how we can commit to God better. We meet with straight guys so they can show us the ropes, kind of a thing, So, okay. So there's all of these things happening, and the feeling that we're making improvements, that things are starting to change. So it was a 1-year live-in program from January 1st to December 31st. I went in 1990.
Was anybody working? I mean, you go to work or anything?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we all get jobs.
Okay.
And it's very controlled, which was interesting for me because I'd never been to a gay bar. I'd never acted out. I didn't know any of these things about, some of the different aspects of the gay life. And I learned a lot about it that year.
I'm guessing everybody talked about what they don't want to do anymore. And it was stuff you'd never heard about before.
It was. Yeah. And it was things I'd never heard about. And, I was I was a gospel musician for years. So the only music that I ever knew was gospel music. So when they were talking about Madonna, who was all the rage back then, and these different artists, I didn't know who they were. I didn't listen to their music. I didn't go to dance clubs. I didn't know any of those things. So it was eye-opening for me. But at the same time, I think there was an aspect of judgmentalism because I thought, well, at least I didn't do that.
Right. Wow. I have heard, as a parallel to what you just said, that one of the best places to pick somebody up or to learn about stuff is to go to Sexaholics Anonymous or one of those kind of groups. And you kind of confirmed that. You learn. Now, were none of these gay men masturbating?
Oh, I'm sure they were. We did have to take showers, and we did that alone.
Okay.
And when we slept at night, you never knew if the guy in the bunk was awake or not. And so I'm sure all of that happened. They're still guys, and they're still young guys.
Yeah.
So it was just more difficult. I don't think I masturbated for like the first 4 months of the program because I was so terrified of being caught, and there was so much shame about masturbation.
Right.
That it was evil. It was just this awful thing. So that was one of the things that you strove to do was to not masturbate. I mean, we weren't looking at porn because that was out of the option or out of the picture. So you just learned to suppress it. You just learned to push this down. But the thing about it is that when I was there, and again, not knowing anything about homosexuality and hearing about the quote unquote gay lifestyle, it was presented in a way that said homosexuality was only about sex, and it was perverted sex. And the reason that you're craving this is because you didn't get enough attention as a man. People who are gay don't actually fall in love. They don't actually have relationships. Those are the kinds of things that I learned, and I had no experience to say, no, that's not true.
Right, yeah.
So there were guys in the program who had different experiences, some of whom had boyfriends before and who had questioned that, and some of whom did not grow up in the evangelical faith like I did. So their experiences were different.
Okay. What kind of methods, techniques? You said you're reading Bibles and praying, going to church, but were there any psychological techniques they used with you or other people? Or did you learn any that you used on other people?
We didn't. But so things changed. So back when I was in the program in 1990, it was just called ex-gay ministry. There wasn't this reparative therapy and what it became as it moved on. It became more of a business. Ex-gay for us was just being a Christian. It was going to church. It was being submissive to God. It was acknowledging our sin. It was this feeling of constantly feeling sinful, but it wasn't. We didn't go through the things that other people have gone through. Since that point, of course, there are other ministries that came after the 1990s, and Joseph Nicolosi was one of the guys that perpetuated this idea of reparative therapy. He was a Catholic, and he was a psychologist, and he really held on to those ideas, the old Freudian ideas about why someone was gay, Freudian ideas that even Freud let go of later on.
Right.
So ministries would pull that into the ministry later. So I was there after I was in the program from 1990. In 1991, I became the outreach director. And I became the outreach director at a time, again, when things were really heating up. And so we had so many phone calls coming to the office that our new director at that point, hired me to field the calls, to set up the engagement. So we were traveling, we were speaking, we were in churches and colleges and doing all these shows. And so my job was to pull that together, was to say, okay, you're going to go here, you're going to do this. And then I was doing a number of those myself. So it was very exciting because we really did feel like we had this message for other people that you can change, something that could be dealt with through the power of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So that was the message.
Wow. It sounds like you became the poster child for this approach.
I wasn't as popular as some of the others. There were two people on our staff that did the Oprah Winfrey Show who were, gay and lesbian, got married. They were on the cover of Newsweek and Time and all these magazines. And then they went on to continue that, working with Focus on the Family and other organizations until he came out in 2013, as we all do.
Yeah, big surprise there.
Right, big surprise.
Did she ever quote revert?
No, in fact, she is running another Exodus type of ministry that's even more far right and more extreme than we've had in the past.
Wow.
So these ministries they're getting more hateful and more arrogant, and they're clinging tighter to this theology than we did. But, again, growing up with that theology, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I didn't see it as, detrimental. In fact, I thought that was my salvation. I thought that was the way out.
Right. Wow. Well, I want to come back later. I want to come back to talk about the details of that process, but I'm really interested in your journey for now. How did you, 7 years you were doing this, and
right.
You moved out of it? Something started not making sense, or something started changing. Can you give us the thumbnail of where you went with that?
Yes. In 1994, I met a girl who was living with my parents at the time. And my dad said to me, the Lord told me that you're going to marry her. And I said, if that's the case, then the Lord is going to have to speak to me, because I'm not getting that voice at this time. So I went there. I was at this point living in San Rafael, and my parents were in Sacramento. And every time I'd go to visit, she was there. So we started talking, and we became really good friends. And then things kind of led, and I thought, well, maybe this is the person. Maybe this is the one that God has for me. So the ministry had decided to move from San Rafael to Tennessee, because at that point, 3 or 4 years after, all the media and everything had kind of dried up. People had heard the story. The media was ready to move on, and churches were no longer inviting us in San Rafael. So we decided to move to Memphis, where we thought we would get more support. And so that's why I just asked her to marry me. We ended up in Memphis. We got married, and that didn't really go well. That didn't go as planned. But that wasn't what did it for me. We had a horrible marriage. We did manage to squeak out a couple of kids. But it was after things kind of fell apart at the ministry. So after the time that I was there, when things had dried up and I wasn't doing my job anymore, I was pulled into the live-in program and teaching classes, and it was becoming kind of weird. It was really moving more towards the psychological reparative therapy model. And we based it on a 12-step program, which, it didn't make sense to me back then, but I wasn't the leader. I wasn't the director of the program. But so anyway, long story short is I ended up leaving. And so her and I stayed in Memphis. I was a music minister for several years. I worked for the director of the development director at Youth for Christ.
Oh.
And then we got a church back in Sacramento. So we ended up back here. After we moved back, she decided that she was done. She wanted to divorce me. So it was about 6.5 years into our marriage. She wanted a divorce. She'd met somebody else. And that sent me on a tailspin. That's when things really stopped making sense for me, is that, the thoughts and the feelings of sexuality had come back pretty strongly. Part of it because I had a horrible marriage, and, there was an outlet, and the fact that I was gay.
Right.
But it was 6 years after that point that I came out.
Wow. Okay.
So even though she divorced me, I clung to what I believed to be true. And I thought, okay, maybe I just haven't done this right. I'm missing something here. And there's something horribly sinful and wrong with me. So I've got to find out what this thing is. So I threw myself into church. I got back into the music ministry, doing all the things I did. But it was just this emptiness inside that just said, this just doesn't feel right. So I guess it was around that same time as I started going to church. I had a job. I was a trainer, so I was traveling around speaking, and I just started to kind of disappear. I pulled out of church. I would just sit at home. I made it my goal to get really fat.
Wow.
Because I'd never been fat before, and I had nothing to do anymore. You spend and I'm sure you can relate to this. When you're in the ministry, you've got your passion. Everything that you do is so wrapped up in what you're doing and what you believe.
Right.
And then you're suddenly without anything. You've got no purpose. You've got nothing to look forward to. I had 2 small children to raise. A lot of it was I was doing it alone, as she was kind of out there sowing her wild oats at the time. So I got really depressed. I decided I was going to gain weight because that was something I had control over. And then that's when I started to think maybe this isn't right. So I had gone back to school because my boss said, he asked me how I was going to improve my skills. I said, I don't know. I'll go to college. So he pushed me. He's like, good, go to college. And so I finished my undergraduate degree because I'd been to Bible college, but I hadn't, gotten a degree.
Right.
And when I finished that, I was so enthralled because I was learning so many things. It triggered the analytical part of my brain that had always had, but had been shut down for so long.
Uh-huh.
I went to graduate school and I started studying transformational learning and cognition and how we believed. And I started studying how the brain works. And this whole world opened up for me. And that was when I decided I'm done. I'm going to test the waters and come out and see where this goes. So that was the first time I decided to get out, and that was around 2006.
Wow.
When I started to walk out of it.
Huh. That's a long time that you struggled with this. What you mentioned depression early on. How much do you think depression played into this?
Depression for me is an ongoing issue. At least I'm free from telling me that there's something wrong with me. But I do have clinical depression. So it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. I mean, did I have it going into this, or did I get it because of the upbringing where you're told that there's something intrinsically wrong with you, no matter who you are or what you do, you can't fix this, you can't change this.
Right. Interesting. It is a chicken and egg thing. I agree, Tim. It's very difficult. But if you're constantly being abused emotionally and you go into a depression, then you can't get out, or you don't have the skills to get back out.
Right.
And it's related to the religion itself. I don't know. That's pretty interesting. So, but you figured out you were depressed at some point in time.
Well, yeah, I had 2 suicide attempts. One of those was before I went into the ministry, and the second one was when she was leaving. Fortunately, the gun that I went to get was locked in my parents' house, and I found this drawer full of keys, thinking it's one of those, but I couldn't get the key.
Oh, okay.
So it was. I had the will, I didn't have the means at that point.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And it's been an ongoing struggle. Again, I think part of that has been there. I am dealing with this in therapy, and I have just a fabulous therapist. Dealing with learning mindfulness and learning all the tools that I didn't have growing up.
Right.
So things are much different now. I'm much freer now, and I have the tools to deal with it. Let me say that one of the things that really happened for me was when Going Gay came out. I was doing an interview, and I was at the local NPR station, and one of the questions she asked me was, "You're in the ministry. You guys are doing all these things with the media, and all these things are happening." She said, "Did you ever at any point in the ministry say, 'No, I really am gay'?" And I remember sitting in the sound booth during that conversation, during that interview, and thinking, no, I could never say that, because the Bible had to be right. It absolutely had to be right. There was something intrinsically wrong with me. I was a sinner. I couldn't be saved. Whatever it was, the Bible had to be right. And that was the crux of everything that held me captive, was that belief that the Bible had to be right.
Right.
So to come to terms with the fact that I was a gay man when the Bible interpreted the way that my denomination did, told me that I was a sinner, stopped making sense. And there were parts where I began to cross over from sanity to insanity. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what was happening. I was just lost in such despair and despondency that I couldn't get out of this. And that's when I finally said, okay, even if I go to hell, I can't do this anymore. I can't live my life like this.
Wow.
So that's where things began to change. And having 2 little kids at home whom I loved and still do, I I knew that I didn't want to raise them like that. I knew I would never want my children to grow up feeling like they had to do something to be loved. I wanted to make it very clear, I love you just the way you are, no matter what happens, no matter what you do, no matter if you end up gay or not, I will always love you. And if I can feel that way, why couldn't the God that I was raised to believe in feel that way?
Yeah, right. Interesting. You're a better father than your God figure is, obviously.
Unfortunately, it's so ingrained in the theology, and that's another thing that with the book is that I wanted to look closely at the theology that we're raised in. We're not going to answer the question, does God exist or not? That the question really is not whether he exists. The question is, how do you believe that God exists?
Right.
And those are the things that trap us.
Right. Okay.
So in the book, Rethinking Everything, I didn't try to tackle the question of whether or not God exists. What I did was walk through, this is what it feels like when you're living in a belief system that doesn't work for you.
Right.
And this is what you need to do, or this is advice of what you can do to get healthy, to walk through that, or to rethink your beliefs. And I do have a segment of the book I put in the appendix where I do a deep dive into where did religion come from? Where did evangelical Christianity come from? Because it's not the faith that we were raised to believe it was.
Right. Yeah. And it sure has evolved a whole lot in the last 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
And it's captured our culture. Yeah. Well, so let's move back to the reparative therapy movement and where it is now and what your observations are. And then I've got some other things I'd like to explore around that. What do you see there?
Yeah, it is dying, or at least it was dying before Donald Trump got into office. It's still happening, and I think it's more dangerous now than it's ever been because there is so much research. And there was research before the 1990s, which that it made me angry to find out when I started, working on a different book, that there was so much research out there that we knew it didn't work. We know that this hasn't worked for a long time. We knew the damage that it was doing, and yet it still perpetuates. So there are states that have outlawed conversion therapy for minors. California is considering outlawing it for adults. And making it completely illegal. So it is changing, but the damage that's being done in the meantime still continues, and it still is reaching kids. There was a new study that came out, and I can't remember the name of the school that did it, but it said that approximately 700,000 youth will go through conversion therapy between the ages of 18 and 29. So it is continuing, and it is, in my opinion, getting worse because they're getting more. They're getting stricter with how they do it, and they're still believing these ancient psychological principles that just don't make any sense.
When you say stricter, tell me what that means in behavioral and practical terms. If you were a person inside one of those programs,
I think they feel threatened. The reparative therapy movement feels threatened because they view liberals and the media and anybody who disagrees with them as anti-Christian or anti-God. Or they feel like they've got to get this message out, and they feel like they've got to inculcate our youth with this belief that homosexuality is bad, that it's a sin. But because the entire system is anti-human in a way, and it's anti-human experience, then it fits very nicely with their message. So what I see is that these organizations are really going after these kids. They're putting out more information. They've been empowered, along with a lot of other anti-human movements lately. Where they're really reaching out, they're really pushing this message and saying, no, that, it's easy now to say, oh, that's fake news or that's not real.
Right.
This is what's real. And of course they can twist the Bible to say anything they want it to say. So that's what I see happening. And I've heard a lot more about camps that have popped up that I didn't know about, or maybe they didn't exist before. But that's where they're getting brutal. They're beating kids. I've heard of kids being raped. And of course there are kids who commit suicide. So we have a lot of information about what's happening, but I think it's something that we have to continue addressing in our society, and we are so concerned about somebody's religious freedom that we're not looking at the consequences of what that means.
Right, right. Well, I don't know if you've seen I gave a talk, I've given a talk several times over the last few years on the myth of sex addiction. And one of the components of that talk, I talk about the programs that kids are being sent off to for reparative therapy. And the Mormons are really pushing it. There's quite a few Mormon, quote, camps. I don't know if you're familiar with some of those or any.
I am.
Oh, okay. Does it seem to you like the Mormons are kind of leading the way, or is it the evangelicals taking the lead here? Or maybe it doesn't matter.
I see more of the evangelicals. Of course, that's my background, so I know that more. But I do have quite a few Mormon friends, and I actually did speak at a Mormon group many years ago, believe it or not. They invited us from our ministry to speak. It was then called Evergreen, and so we met quite a few people. The Mormons have taken a bit of a softer approach to this. And I don't know if you saw, there was a show on for a little while called My Husband is Gay. I think that was the name of it.
Yeah. I never saw it, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So they followed these guys around who were Mormons, and they had this, this life that they tried to put on TV. But what was interesting about that show was that clearly these guys were gay. Clearly they were attracted to other guys, and the wives were so controlling and trying to hold on to what they could or couldn't do. And I wrote an article about that because I said, at least they're talking about it.
Right.
And I know people were very upset about them putting the show on there, but I said, at least they're talking about it. And I do see movement in that some of these conservative organizations and even the evangelical church does now have churches and places to go where they're acknowledging, okay, you're gay and it can't be changed. So they're coming up with different ways to do that. Of course, these are, more educated, more informed groups. It's not a wide net by any means, but there is some change. But I think what we're going to see is it's going to go underground. So there'll be more people that are pushing these types of camps, and it's going to get more violent. And I think there's going to be much more emotional trauma than there has been in the past.
Right, right. Wow. So parents are sending their kids off, and they may be aware that coercion or violence or the threat of physical harm is there, but they do it anyway, I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah. If you look at the homeless youth population, right, 20 to 40% of homeless youth are LGBT. So, and I had a friend who works in the homeless youth center in the South who said it was much higher than that. And he said a lot of it was just because they're quote unquote Christians and they kick these kids out on the street and they have no place to go. And of course, they use their faith to justify what they do to their family.
Right. Yeah. The so-called tough love from an evangelical perspective looks a whole lot like abuse and abandonment. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
Okay.
So, Tim, question: how do you identify now, religiously speaking?
So I identify as a truth seeker, and I'll tell you why that is that when Going Gay came out, I started attending these gay Christian conferences, and my mind was blown because those two things simply did not go together in my evangelical mind. So I couldn't put the pieces together. So I've been doing a lot of interviews and talking with people, and it was funny, this guy who interviewed me on a podcast to ask that question, but he asked a more direct question. He said, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "I don't consider myself a Christian. I consider myself a truth seeker, because all truth, regardless of what your ideologies are, is the same. So everything falls in line. So if a God does exist, then that God is going to be a God of truth. So I'm more concerned about learning truth and people living in truth and people living authentically. And, I just don't think that God is concerned about somebody who watches porn or masturbates more than he's concerned about kids being taken away from their families at the border."
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right. So another thing that occurs to me is what if anything do you recommend people do? This is a real issue out there. I haven't got a clue where to begin to help deal with this or help people realize those camps are doing real harm to people or that sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts about that?
You know what? A lot of it's education. It's just talking. And you see things that pop up on the internet, right? There's somebody, I forgot who the actor was, whose niece got taken to one of those camps, and he blew it up. He made it a big thing. So the more we can talk about it, the more people are going to be aware of that. And I think that's the best thing that we can do. So there is a group of us, actually, we're former leaders in ex-gay ministry. We all have a Facebook group. We get together, we talk about the issues, we address them. So an interview comes up. We're kind of all over the country, so somebody will step in and do that interview. So we are talking about it. We're trying to get that out there. The problem, of course, like much of sexuality, is the shame factor. So when you have somebody who's gone through conversion therapy or reparative therapy or whatever you want to call it, they have so much shame, they just want to disappear.
Right.
And that was the problem with a lot of us guys that left the group. And I saw it from both sides. So as a leader in the group, when people would disappear, we thought, oh, they've been dragged off by the devil, they've been deceived, and we had nothing else to do with them.
Yeah. When
I was the one who left, I felt so much shame and embarrassment that I was the single person who couldn't make this ex-gay thing work. And I did it, all those years, did as best as I could, and it still wasn't going to happen.
Right.
I had no idea that other people were going through the same thing because we didn't connect. There was just too much shame to talk about.
Interesting.
I think the more we can talk about this, the more we can get those stories, the more we can share those stories of people that we hear or know about, the bigger impact this is going to make. And it is, in my opinion, still a major crisis in the LGBT community that many people have been touched by this in one way or another.
It really has been. You're right. I may or may not be aware that within our chat line at Recovering from Religion, we have LGBT group, and that's lightly moderated, and people are getting on there and telling their stories and sharing the very thing you just talked about. It's pretty obvious how traumatic some of this stuff has been to people of all ages, even people who never went through it, but they experienced it through their church in some way. So, yeah, so talk a little bit more about your new book and what you're trying to accomplish there and what the message is.
So the new book, Rethinking Everything When Faith and Reality Don't Make Sense, was, it was written really to get those people who are kind of falling by the wayside, trying to figure out, where do I fit in? Where do I go? How do I address this? There was a lady that I knew from several years ago. Our kids went to the same school at one point. And so when I came out, she was very concerned about my salvation. And we had these conversations. And I noticed that when we talked in these conversations, she would ask me a question, which I would answer, and then she would reword the question and ask it again. And after all of these, I don't know how long this went on, several weeks, we just kept going back and forth. And finally, what it boiled down to was the question of, what if I'm wrong? I don't want to be wrong. I'm afraid to be wrong.
Right. The Pascal.
And I tried to address that in the book. So this book, the difficult part about writing this book was that I have a lot of information that's a lot of teaching in there, because I do go back and I do talk about where did religion come from and how do we get to American Christianity. And I have a whole, now an appendix on hell. Where did the belief in hell come from? Where did the devil come from? And those are the kinds of things that we ask that keep us up at night when we're trying to change our beliefs and walk away from those beliefs. So I wanted to address all of that, which I ended up, again, putting it in the appendix because there's so much information and it kind of broke up the flow of the book. But it was written to answer that question of, what if I'm wrong? It was written to help people sleep at night. It was written to give them permission to say, oh my gosh, I don't have to feel this way. I can come out. I can be exactly who I wanted to be. And I know, for me, of course, I spend a lot of time on the LGBT issue because that's my background. But there are people that come from other walks of life that are not, we don't fall neatly in that conformity of the Pentecostal or fundamentalist church. We're all very different. So this gives them permission to say, just be exactly who you are. And if there is a God that exists, I believe that the best praise that we can offer is to live authentically and be exactly who we were created to be.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I wanted to accomplish with this book, is I wanted to capture or catch the people that were falling, catch the people that were saying, I don't know how to leave my faith. I want to, I'm not sure about this. I don't know how to think anymore. I'm not sure how to put the pieces together. And it just walks them through. Right. When you do walk away, this is what you're going to feel. And this is what it feels like. And this is what you can do about that. Good. And the last chapter of the book is, this is how you can find your passion again.
Wow. That sounds like a book I should be getting a hold of. I'm sorry to say I haven't read it yet, Tim.
I will get you a copy.
Well, the fact is that probably I don't know, 60, 70% of the people that contact us are going through that very thing. They're saying, what if I'm wrong? And I wake up in cold sweats about hell and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And it is a deeply programmed thing that starts when you're 3 or 4 years old. And, you know, people don't realize how deeply that is. And you didn't get there rationally. So, it is a psychological journey, leaving that worldview behind and recognizing that it was pretty distorted, to say the least. Well, good. Tim, I want to say thanks again for reaching out and asking to talk to me, because this is an area I have not covered or talked about on my podcast. You are going to be literally the 90th episode of Secular Sexuality. So after 90 episodes, I finally get around to looking at reparative or convergent therapy. Is there anything else you'd like to throw in here before we sign off here? And
you know what? If people have questions, they're more than happy to go to my website, which is timrymel.com, TIMRYMEL.com. I have a ton of resources, and on that page I talk about a lot of different things, because as a former evangelical, I'm also a former Republican. So I kind of, you know, when you come out of it, you come alive and go, oh my gosh, the world is more than just about me.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of different topics that I talk about in the resources, but really if there are people who are dealing with the gay issue or the LGBT issue, I've got a ton of resources. And the main thing I always tell people is talk to somebody first. Just start talking. Find somebody you can talk to. And after that, go back to the website. There's all kinds of things you can read. I'm real plugged in with a lot of people that have a lot of really great information just to ease your mind. It's okay. It's going to be okay. There is a way out of this.
Good. Excellent. I love hearing that. And it's Tim Rymel, all one word?
Yes.
TIMRYMEL.com. Great.
Yes.
Well, reach out to Tim. Sounds like he'd be a good person to contact if you've got any of those concerns. So we're going to sign off here, Tim, and I'm going to say my thing. Go out and give yourself a big orgasm, and I want you to say, or go give someone else a big orgasm. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for listening to Secular Sexuality today. And as you know, I want you to go out and give yourself a big orgasm.
Or go out and give someone else a big orgasm.